Hello everyone and welcome to Exercise Physiology, our second to last week of class. We will have probably three, maybe four more lecture videos total, including this one. 3 or 4 total, including this one. 4 at the most, 3 possibly. So one of the two. Depends on how long each of the videos go and how much I cover, and essentially what is 3 chapters, 20, 21, and 22. I will post all the PowerPoints as well here this week, at least the ones completed, in addition to the one or two that I will do next week as well, as soon as possible after going through these videos as well. And that'll help prepare you for, of course, your final exam. It's not really your final, it's the last exam. Shouldn't call it final exam, exam number 3. So all that is coming, and of course your research paper and your project as well. The project, remember, you can work with someone else on if you so choose to do. You just have to let me know if you're doing so and who you're doing so with prior to the point of submitting, turning that in when it is due. That being said, just talking for this week about exercise prescription, chapter 20. A couple questions I was posing very quickly to you in the last week's video before the Easter break. What's the primary tool for assessing exercise readiness for anyone? It's often said, what if they're this age, this gender, this height, this weight, they can do this, they can't do that. Well, the bottom line is, for assessing someone's readiness for exercise, it has to first start with someone's coordination, their motor development, their motor control. What can they physically do? So the more assessments you have that assess movement skills, specifically the skills that you think are going to be necessary for performing exercises that are going to need to be performed to reach whatever goal we're trying to achieve. So we got to be really clear about that. If a person's going to be sprinting and that's the goal, I want to make sure that you can just perform basic and high knee actions with reasonable hip flexion and hip extension for the down leg, proper arm flexion with the arm going forward, and proper spinal position, all the things that I expect from a standpoint of normal motion prior to worrying about how fast you go. Likewise, if someone said they wanted to see someone doing how much weight they could squat, can they do a good body weight squat? Body weight, where they add any external load. That should be pursued long before we worry about whether they can or can't do it. Certainly, we're going to have expectations, understandably from our experiences in life, for someone who's of a certain age or gender or size or whatever might be the case, or their background, what they tell us they've done in the past or have done in recent past. That being said, we won't really know until we've had a chance to assess movement. And that said, there are so many ways we can do that. Make sure whatever you're assessing is consistent with reasonable levels of movement skill as necessary for whatever the goal is that's being pursued. Okay. Now, and I brought the question last time of, are adults smarter than kids when it comes to exercise? Well, I said that because a lot of people talk about kids when it comes to learning a foreign language or learning concepts. They do it faster than adults. And it all comes down to, like anything else, it's your ability to focus on what you're doing. So if anyone's going to get better from exercise, if they are really embracing what they're doing, if they're accepting what they're doing, whatever it might be, they're much more likely to get better progress in doing so. But being distracted, only doing it part way, not giving full effort, not getting proper rest, not getting proper nutrients and hydration, not having the proper warming up, all those things that go into it. No one's really better by age at exercise. It's very much dependent upon all the factors that go into it. And really, at the end of the day, it's going to be who's the most focused to get the most from themselves. And of course, that's relative to so many aspects, one person versus another. And of course, the opinion question I asked last time very briefly, what should be the defining difference in participating as a male versus a female in sport? For me, having coached a lot of males and females in sport, it's just comes back to kind of like the same thing we talked about in the previous 2 questions right here. What are they individually showing you? Certainly I have an idea in my head every time I ever meet anyone. As soon as they tell me what their goals are, I'm quickly assessing what I saw in terms of how the person moved, just what little behaviors I've seen that makes me think that whether they're more athletic or less athletic, stronger, less strong, more endurance, less endurance, any of the above. That said, we won't really know until we get them going. So the defining difference ultimately is how they perform in lighter activities, more towards advanced type activities, and more stable before unstable. Bilateral versus unilateral, From a standpoint of motion, if they don't have proper bilateral balance, they need to focus on more unilateral focus. Definitely lighter loads before heavier loads, slow before fast, right? Maybe closed chain before open chain, all depending upon someone's needs. Closed chain, we're talking about basically attached to a fixed object. The physical therapy definition for closed chain is fixed to the ground. From an engineering perspective, from a biomechanics perspective, that is not the definition we use with exercise. In a therapeutic setting, it would be. From an exercise prescription standpoint, it would not be. Closed chain would be fixed to a bar, like a barbell bench press. You move your one side of you, it moves the bar on both sides of you because you're fixed to the bar. Whereas unilateral would be, or open chain would be dumbbells. You can move one side, it wouldn't necessarily affect you on the other side. Okay? That's what we refer to as open chain versus closed chain. Typically speaking, someone with poor coordination would be preferring more to go toward more closed chain possibly, although the downside would be is that they're stronger one side than the other, they're going to continue to be stronger on the one side and weaker on the one that's weaker because they're just going to enhance the strong side when you have a closed chain activity. So a lot of things to be considering in all those variables, which is why it's so complex. It's not as simple as here, do these exercises and you'll get better. Not necessarily. That shouldn't be surprising to us, right? Now, before we even start moving with exercise in general, we want to make sure we have medical clearance and evaluation of someone's abilities, their skills, their limitations, their capabilities. From a medical standpoint, if you're below the age of 39, which everybody in this class is, other than me who teaches it at 49, everyone's below 39 years old. So you should be seeing a doctor for full physical assessment, full physical checkup every 3 to 5 years. More often or less often than that, it's risk. Risk goes up because you're missing something potentially in those great durations of time. The older we get, the more the duration of time for between doctor visits should be going down or decreasing, right, for overall evaluations. Every 2 to 3 years for 40 to 49 years old, I'm beyond 5 years. I'm already behind myself. Luckily, I'm in better physical health, generally speaking, than most people my age, at least from my research and what I understand, what I know. That being said, there's a lot of things I don't know, so I'm already behind the curve in that one. Every 2 to 3 years for 40 to 49-year-olds, and recommended. This is all from the medical field. American Medical Association and American College of Sports Medicine referring these guidelines. Every 1 to 2 years for 50 and over. And why is that the case? Of course, the more older we get, the more risk we have for health concerns, the things going potentially wrong. That's what the averages will say. That's what research says. It doesn't mean that's necessarily going to be the case, which is why we go get assessed. Because we don't just assume, you're 50 years old, your liver's going down, man. Not necessarily. A lot of things have to be at play. That's why we need to go get checked. And unfortunately, I've known people in my life, people that are close to me in family that did not pay attention, and it still frustrates me to this day, did not go get checked out, and some of them not with us because they didn't go in and get checked, and it was too late when they found out. You need to be going in and checked on a regular basis. There's reasons for this. Research tells us these things. If you know someone, encourage them to do so, and don't be the person who does not follow this. Like I already speaking, preaching to the choir, preaching to myself right now. I need to get back in there and do that. I will tell you, for me, while for a lot of people, it's a lack of a good referral. My doctor, I left my doctor a few years ago and I haven't gone to see one since was the problem. And I now need to find a good doctor. That said, it's not an excuse, it's a good excuse. It's what I call an excuse, but not a good one. That said, the risk factors that we're looking to determine of primary importance when we talk about health risk factors for when you go see the doctor, we want to make sure you live, right? A person actually is going to live between now and the next intended visit to the doctor. Then we talk about the quality of life. But first, let's get longevity first, okay? That said, age 45 or older, which is what my category for men, or 55 or older for women, you're considered to be at risk if you're of those age ranges where health issues tend to be of greater concern, more so for men than women on average. So that's why the age is different. Okay, that's partly due to the differences of the many decades before with men in the workplace and women not necessarily in the workplace. And so those numbers are becoming closer because now you have women in the last 3-4 decades, a lot more in the workplace, understandably so, as should be the case, but consequently now taking on the same stressors as at home and at work, and not just at home or at work. Whenever we have both, that always, you could say the same thing for whether they're men or women. You could also argue for family people or all sorts of variable factors. The fact of the matter is that men, typically speaking, have more health factor risk at earlier ages than women do. That's just due to the research. Family history of myocardial infarction. If there's anyone in your family that's had a heart attack, you should be seeing, actually, that's more specifically also to the two ages of, doesn't say it here. It should be for the women, if they have someone in their family has had a heart attack before the age of 65, and for the men before the age of 55. That should be here, it's not. If someone in your family, brother, father, son, would be the case for most of you with the son part, but brother or father before the age of 55 had a heart attack, that's a risk factor for you. For the women before the age of 65, sister, mother, daughter before the age of 65, health risk factor for you. And the more points you have, the greater need to be paying attention to what's going on health-wise. When you technically speaking, when you have two or more points, two more of these risk factors, you're at significantly higher risk for having coronary artery disease or having a potential heart attack or major health issue. One or none, not a big deal. And of course, when they have multiple, well, the risk obviously goes up, become more toward high risk. But technically, you're not high risk until a doctor diagnoses you with a specific issue or a problem. Smoking cigarettes at all within the last 6 months is a coronary artery disease risk. And what we found from research is that people who drink or smoke in general, when they say they drink a little, they drink a fair amount. When they say they drink a fair amount, they drink quite a bit. They drink quite a bit, they drink a lot. Same with smoking. Everybody escalates. No, everybody always tends to under-report their bad behaviors, and they over-report their good ones. Do you exercise on a regular basis? Oh yeah. What do you mean, oh yeah? Oh yeah, almost every day, which means probably every 3 or 4 days when people say that. Almost every day. They're not every day. They're lucky if they're every other day, right? We always downgrade it for the positive behaviors and we uptick it for the negative behaviors with most people. Hypertension, high blood pressure, high pressure, elevated pressure, hyper elevated, right? If the blood pressure is systolic, the pressure of the ventricles of the heart during contraction, if the pressure is higher than 140 or higher, I should say, or the filling, the diastolic is 90 or higher, either one of those numbers is potential for hypertensiveness. And if someone is measured high, they're not automatically one time measured high, you have high blood pressure, we need to put you on medication. But if they're regularly measured high, that's of concern, and the possibility is there for medication or need to reduce blood pressure, certainly from a short-term perspective of lowering blood pressure by exercise. Exercise unequivocally has the highest impact on both on your, I should say, your cholesterol, blood pressure, and your glucose levels. Okay, all three of those things. Far more than prescription drugs, far more than nutrition, far more than sleep, far more than all those things. Okay, exercise has the greatest impact, short term and long term, on these factors. Don't get me wrong, prescription drugs play a role. Sleep certainly plays a role. Standpoint of nutrition obviously plays a role. They all do. Some will say, well, when I started eating better, my numbers changed dramatically. Well, certainly, any positive behavior is going to affect them all. But the one with the greatest impact is those people who are engaged in regular activity rarely have these of elevated blood pressure, elevated blood cholesterol, and elevated or depressed glucose levels, barring some genetic rationale behind these factors. There's always exceptions to every rule. The LDL, the low density lipoproteins, the artery clearing agents. HDL is the high density lipoproteins, artery clotting agents. Unfortunately, they call it good cholesterol, bad cholesterol. Really don't want to see you put that in a post. That is nomenclature that should not be used at all, because technically, just because LDL is the bad cholesterol, it doesn't mean that you don't have some. So I guess because LDL is pretty much always higher than HDL, that being said, I guess it means you're mostly bad. It's just not true. And the research would show that actually LDL being high by itself does not have the significance that's often had in past references toward blood cholesterol. That said, it doesn't mean we want it to be high. We certainly want the HDL to be higher, which is the artery clearing agents. I think I may have reversed that. My apologies. HDL is artery clearing agents. LDL is artery clotting agents. Okay, but we want to have the HDL be 40 or higher. LDL be technically, we want to see that be Opposite of what I have here too. Geez, sorry. HDL should be 40 or higher. LDL should be 130 or lesser. Okay, those are the opposite of what it says right there. I want the LDL to be lower if possible, HDL to be going up. With positive behaviors, with regular exercise, HDL tends to go up and LDL tends to go down. Same with positive behaviors in terms of good sleep, up and down. Good nutrition, up and down. Proper prescription drugs when necessary to do so, up and then down. Okay, but nothing impacts HDL going up like exercise does. Impaired fasting glucose, 100 or greater is preferred to being hyperglycemic potentially, and below 85 hypoglycemic, and they want to test you more than once, 8 to 12 hours of fasting before they take your blood glucose levels to determine whether or not you're actually potentially diabetic or hypoglycemic. That said, neither of those things being good, but having a day where you are higher or lower by itself does not mean that you're diabetic or hypoglycemic. Obesity, BMI, body mass index of 30 or higher. A lot of people say, well, that's not really the end all be all, because some bodybuilders, some football players, some athletes are really big with BMIs above 30, but they're mostly muscle. That being said, research will show that people who are bigger tend to have lesser length in life. They just do. Not always the case. There's exceptions to every rule, but for the most part, it's really a relationship of longevity. Lighter people who eat less are the ones who live the longest. Just a simple fact. I don't have much intention of not enjoying my food as life goes on, but there's the reality that's my BMI being as it is, which is not 30, but it's 28, 29. That I'm of the high BMI category, so consequently, I am at risk from the standpoint of having length of life being shortened versus the average person, according to this basic standards. However, like all things, every one of these factors is just one factor. It's when you have more than one factor at play that the risk increases, and that's when things get serious, not just one factor. If the only factor was a high BMI, everything else was great, by itself, not a big deal. However, the expectation is once you have one risk factor, other issues start to come up. It's kind of like your car. You have one problem and all of a sudden new problems seem to pop up. It's the true of the body as well. Even though the body can repair itself, the car cannot, some of those things are similar. The waist size may be a better indicator than BMI. Body mass just being height to weight, which may not by itself be the most ideal, but do not dismiss BMI. BMI plays a role, and there is some significance there, no question about it, for the large majority of the population, including athletes, for longevity of life. But the greater concern, unquestionably, and no one's going to contest this in the health or fitness categories of expertise, that a waist size is much more significant than just BMI, height versus weight. Your waist size, 40 inches or more for the men, or 35 inches or more for the women, is considered to be concerning, very much so from an obesity standpoint. Sedentary lifestyle. Certainly, to get this one, incorporate sedentary lifestyle along with one or more of these factors, that's when the risk is going to be at its highest. If someone's regularly active, the probability is they don't have many. The age they can't do anything about. They may have one more of these factors, maybe, but probability is they don't have a sedentary lifestyle. They're participating in regular everyday exercise for 30 minutes or more of a moderate or higher level, is not likely to have many of these issues, if at all. General exercise prescription for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Children and adolescents age 6 to 17 years is recommended to get 60 plus minutes of physical activity daily. That's of the moderate or higher nature, right? Generally speaking, being active, running around, doing things, hour or more for young ones. Notice it didn't talk, well, I have a 4-year-old. Below 5 years and below, you do what you can. They're not old enough where they can necessarily be engaged on a regular basis. You still want them to be as active as possible, true of any person at any age. However, these are kind of reasonable standards here. Mostly moderate or vigorous. 3 days of vigorous activity weekly, minimally, it should say minimally, and 3 days of strength training once they get about age 6 when they can potentially consider it. It doesn't mean we have to go give 6-year-olds 3 days of strength work and 3 days of cardio work. No, but just means generally speaking, we want to have them engaged in something that helps them improve their strength. That could be anything. Could be just doing some body weight squats, or see if they can do some push-ups or something, or a little bit of light running here and there. Could be any number of things. It doesn't necessarily have to be overly intense or specific to a particular gym piece of equipment or anything like that. Adults aged 16 to 64. There's a crossover here with the adolescents to adults. And actually, we talked about it before, that there's an argument that adolescents could be up to about age 21, and adults can be more like 22 and above. There's kind of different standards here referring to what there actually could be crossover here, especially for the girls, is what we're really talking about age 16, whereas the boys can be more adults much later from a standpoint of pubescence and maturing physically. 150 plus minutes weekly for moderate activity and 75 plus minutes of vigorous activity. Generally speaking, from a moderate perspective, we're talking about between 40 to 70% VO2 max. You get above 70, 75% VO2 max, that's considered to be vigorous. From a standpoint of force output work you're putting in, that moderate activity, we're basically talking about activities that are absolutely 60% or under. For force output, 55, 60% and under, and anything that's vigorous is more likely to be 65, 70+% force output going up, okay, for more vigorous, to get more clarity between force output versus VO2 max, right? Heart rate, remember, is always a little bit higher than VO2 max, so when we refer to about 40 to 70% VO2 max for moderate activity, you're really talking about 60% to about 80-ish% heart rate wise, if we're going through the formula of if you're above 39 or below 18, 220 minus your age, 207 times 0.7 or minus 0.7 times your age. And if we're talking about someone the age of 18 to 39, that's 220 minus your age. And then we talk about between 60 to 80% of your max heart rate, okay, for what's referred to as moderate, and vigorous be above 80%. Okay, 80% of the max heart rate. Heart rate reserve is often used as well, which is really the Carbonin equation. 220 minus your age, subtracting then your resting heart rate, adding your training intensity expectation, and then, multiplying by your training intensity expectation, and adding the resting heart rate back. So if you're 20 years old, you have 220 minus 20 is 200, and then you would take away resting heart rate, say 50. So 200 minus 50 is 150. Then you say maybe 70% intensity, 30% of 150 is 105, add resting heart rate back, which was 50, and you got 155. The expectation is 155 beats per minute at 70% intensity for a 20-year-old person with a 50 resting heart rate. However, that doesn't mean we got to get to 150 beats a minute. This I hopefully have said before, and this resonates with you. The goal is never to get the heart rate to a given point. That is never the goal. The only exception might be at really low levels of intensity. We're trying to maybe establish some immune system strengthening. We want to make sure we get at least to that 50, 55%, probably more likely 55% of max heart rate, which is really low. My 55% of my max heart rate's around 100, 105, somewhere in there. It's really, really low, okay? Most people it really is. So those are minimums maybe for just getting some health value, but we don't say you got to get your heart above 150 or 160 to get any benefit from cardio today to make it high intensity. That makes no sense. We go based upon actual performance, how someone's performing. We also don't want to see someone going out there and actually getting the heart rate up, doing something, and yet they're slower than they were the day before at lower intensity. My favorite example of this was back about 15-ish years ago, give or take. I was close to the biggest I've been at about 235, 240. But I've always done exercise, never fallen off completely off the map, even though I've had lots of ebb and flow. I'm nowhere near the level of athleticism I once had. But that said, I was a collegiate track athlete, so I was running a pretty darn good pace for a while there. But, we're talking about the age of about 35, 36, somewhere in there. I've taken a decade plus off from absolutely crazy activity, although I've been involved somewhat. Hadn't run for a while. I went out for a run. And I actually was able to run 7-minute miles, 3 miles, kept my heart rate below 150 the entire time. I was ecstatic. Like, who do you know that's 235 pounds-ish that can run 3 7-minute miles, keep the heart rate below 150? That is phenomenal. Oh, gosh, I was excited. That said, the next day, I went out the door, started jogging. My pace was probably about a 10 or 11, 12-minute mile. My heart rate went above 160 like that. Now, if you said the goal was to get above 155 beats per minute, then day one, I had a terrible workout apparently, because I was running a 7-minute mile pace and my heart rate was below 150. So darn it, Mark, get out there and run harder. You're not doing this right. That makes no sense. Because the next day, my heart rate was really high, above 160, but I'm running like a 10, 11, 12-minute mile. I'm running like more than 50% slower. But would you have gone Nice job, man. Heart rate's up just like you want it to be. No, that makes no sense at all. Okay. Be really clear about that. Strength training, 2+ days a week, generally advised. Significant benefits are reached though when someone gets to be 300 to 150, at least 300 moderate activity minutes and at least 150 vigorous minutes. And we're talking about 7+ days a week, 10.5 hours weekly for athletic performance improvement. Older adults, 65 and older, same as the adult, but avoiding inactivity, hugely important to not cease activity to avoid the health problems that come with age. And focus on perhaps a balance exercise. It doesn't mean you need to give someone tremendously challenging balance exercises. It means you need to challenge them movement skill wise enough that they don't lose their ability to balance. It's not the same thing. You don't give someone outrageously challenging balance activities on a ball or a disc to improve balance. They must master the ground, master the stable before moving to the unstable. If someone's not good on stable surfaces, don't give them unstable surfaces to be on. Technically, stable is a barbell, unstable is a dumbbell. Stable is a typical machine that's closed chain. Unstable is a cable machine with one arm. Okay. Detailed prescription involves mode or type, something you enjoy to get someone started from a general perspective. It's more specific. We're talking about athletic performance, right? Cardiovascular wise, certainly from a general standpoint of movement, walking should be first. It's a general skill that everybody needs to be able to get around, running when you need to go run after someone or something, or get out of the way or get away from someone, or avoid getting hit by a car, whatever it might be. I think everybody needs to be able to run. If they can, don't lose the ability. That's crucial. Cycling is also valid cardiovascular exercise. However, you don't get the impact benefit. Impact is not a bad thing. You're going to hear people say it. You're in college right now. Maybe you haven't heard people say it yet, but I don't want the impact. It's really hard on my body. The impact is not hard on your body if it's the right impact. It can be, in which case, yes, we don't want to do anything that hurts you, but if it doesn't hurt you to walk, then that's what you should be doing. And walking in the pool or in the water is not going to help someone walk on land because the forces externally are not the same in the water as on land. But other forms of cardiovascular activity are always also advised, but half or more of the time should be spent walking or running, barring sport performance or injury or inability to perform walking or running. Strength training tools, dumbbells, require a great deal of coordination. They are definitely open chain. You move one limb, you can do that without moving the other limb. You can move one side at a time, which is tremendous. If someone lacks symmetry, left to right, to work on one side, then work on the other, rather than necessarily trying to work both sides same time, that's an advantage. However, it requires a great deal of coordination and control skill in performing actions with dumbbells in your hands in general. Barbells, less coordination required, often can enable you to lift greater loads because it is closed chain. You actually utilize your stronger arm when your weaker arm or weaker leg can't do the work. So honestly, more time spent with dumbbells may be a better choice. Medicine balls are a tremendous tool for upper body power training rather than trying to throw objects that are heavy. First of all, if you're trying to be powerful, to increase the amount of work you do in less time, or just the same amount of work in less time, which is the primary determination between strength and power, producing significant levels of force, strength, significant levels of force over greater distances, but in less time, power. Okay, that said, medicine balls for throwing, much more advisable than you taking objects or jumping off of things, doing push-ups and landing on your wrists, on your elbows. Not the wisest thing for the joints. It's a much better choice if you pick medicine balls for that usage. Okay?
Hey, Daddy.
Yes, Maddie. Yes. Realities of life. Hi, Maddie girl. I'm finishing my video, okay? I'll finish this up and then we can hang out, okay?
I'm pretending I'm a horse.
You're
I'm pretending to pick me birdie.
Okay. Thanks, Maddie girl. Like so many people, so many things in your lives right now, you're having challenges with dealing with time, and you're maybe all in confined spaces, people you work with, maybe with family, whereby it's difficult to get to the things you need to because everybody else is requiring space, time, all those things. It's a challenge that I face as well, right? That being said, medicine balls are a great tool, preferably not more than 1K to 5K when you're throwing medicine balls either with a partner or at an object, predominantly more for when you're for extreme power, either throwing over a distance, for a forward distance, or throwing against a brick or concrete wall, not a plaster wall or anything where it's going to break, okay? Or against a rebounder like a trampoline, not a good choice. It's going to bounce back harder than it left your hands, more likely to hurt someone when it comes back. Bands are great for travel tools. They can be attached anywhere. The downside is as you pull on that band, or as the band at its attachment point, as it moves farther from its attachment point, as you press or pull, whatever you're doing, the tension increases dramatically. As we mentioned, at least in the past to some extent, that when you, generally speaking, from a single joint perspective, when you move a single joint in terms of flexion of your elbow or extension of your elbow, or talking about from your knee, flexion or extension of your knee. When you have any joints where you have muscles that cross two joints, it's not the same. But that said, with single joint muscles, generally speaking, you're strongest about mid-range. So you don't want to have an exercise in an arm curl where it's the most difficult at the end or the beginning. You want it to be most difficult in the middle. You don't want to do a preacher curl if you have the choice. You don't want to do some exercise where the load is tremendously heavy at the very beginning and gets easier as you come up, or it's the hardest when you're at the very, very end. You want to make sure it's most difficult in the middle, which, by the way, is a standing arm curl with a dumbbell. It's a beautiful thing when that's the most ideal. I'd much rather give someone a standing dumbbell curl than a band curl with a band below your feet or attached to an object. However, bands, again, are very portable. They're not wrong or bad. There's no such thing as wrong or bad here. Please don't ever think that's the case. There's always risk versus benefit. And if you're looking at these concepts with risk being higher than the benefit you're going to get from it, then you don't want to use that tool at that moment. However, when you have no choices, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you're not carrying tons of dumbbells around with you, then bands are a good choice. It's still going to give you some reasonable resistance, just knowing that being your primary choice is not really an ideal thing, if at all possible to avoid. But they are tremendously portable, and you can do almost anything with them, which is pretty cool. Cables. Cables, you can adjust your body position such that you can make the difficulty of exercise more appropriate to your liking, which you really can't do with anything else, which is nice. It doesn't mean that cables are the end-all be-all. They require a great deal of coordination, and they're also not hard to come by unless you have expensive equipment available and you go to a gym to do all of your physical work. It's not always possible to use it. There are still some exercises, without going into great detail. Feel free to ask me via email and whatnot if you want to, but from a general perspective, two primary exercises, both shoulder flexion and shoulder abduction, are be more valuable with a dumbbell than with cables. Okay, from a standing perspective, you cannot match up performing basic shoulder exercises in the sagittal and the coronal plane. You cannot anywhere come near the benefit you can with more benefit with dumbbells. You can't even come close with the cables in those situations because of force angles. Okay, that's getting complex, but this is your reminder. There's a lot to this. Okay, you're not going to be tested on the complexity of these variable tools, but you need to be thinking about them. You need to keep examining them, going into biomechanics, not just exercise physiology here. Machines are tremendously advantageous for beginners. They're tremendously advantageous when you have situations where it's a single plane, or what we call 1 degree of freedom for our machine motions. When someone's having a very neurologically challenged day, you're physically tired, you want to have a lighter day, machines are a great one to use. There's no such thing as you graduate past machines. That just doesn't make any sense. If the machine can match the motion you're looking for, which is the predominant rationale why you should use an exercise, we want a given motion that should incorporate the muscles, the joint actions, the connective tissue involvement that we want. We don't try to find ways of working only the muscles without thinking about the motions. Motions come first, movements come first, then the muscles will follow, as long as we're clear about what muscles should be involved in those exercises. Motions first, joint actions first, forces second, muscles last, okay? Machines are valid tools if you can match the motion you're looking for. If it creates an improper motion, it's going to cause particularly more injury than help. Kettlebells, should be an E there between the L and the B. Kettlebells are very versatile, like dumbbells. You can carry it around with you, although it can be heavy carrying those big things around, some of the bigger kettlebells with you on a regular basis. Unfortunately, people can tend to get carried away with them, think they're going to be a substitute for dumbbells, when in actuality, they're not a good replacement for dumbbells. When you're doing arm curls or overhead presses, the weight is displaced, so the load is actually away from your wrist and how you're holding it. So it's actually probably a detriment, probably a lot more benefit to you in situations where you're doing Olympic type lifts, where you're doing potentially some lower body type exercises, but you do not want to be putting yourself in a situation where you're putting more stress on your wrists, on your elbows, on your shoulders than you need to be. So you got to be really thinking about these tools to some extent. There's a lot of choices here. Ropes. Uh, Battling ropes, will take ropes and start going back and forth with ropes, whatnot. And they don't take into account the tremendous stress on the shoulder, tremendous benefit to the core, tremendous benefit toward coordination and control, and some core development from a standpoint of helping you with greater levels of power and strength, and some endurance, of course, too. But that said, tremendous challenge to the shoulders. You got to really make sure someone's already got strong shoulders, a good grip before you start getting crazy on something like rope type training. It requires a great deal of coordination. The body shouldn't be moving, the arms move. Surface, we're talking about running. Generally speaking, the sand's the softest surface. However, because it gives so much, your technique is going to be poor. I always refer to sand as either being one of two things, like cement, the closest to the water, closer to the water you get, or so soft that your coordination's off. I always call sand fun day. I wouldn't refer to sand as ever a day for a serious workout. The exception being your volleyball player, a sand volleyball player. That's your surface. I'm not talking about specific sports here. We're talking about you're not a sand athlete, okay? And you're just looking at sand as a possible form of different stress. It's a fun day. It's gonna alter your mechanics in negative ways. It's not really an ideal thing for you mechanically, for the most part, with any regularity. Okay, not a bad surface. Don't get me wrong. That said, concrete's the hardest surface to land on, hardest on your joints, other than, and right behind it is the hard sand, by the way. Okay, or right close to it, I should say, not right behind it. As well, because it's harder on the landing, though, it's a better push off. You get a much stronger push off concentrically. So the concrete is actually easier on you concentrically, producing force, harder on you eccentrically, trying to decelerate, reduction of force, shall we say, or deceleration or negative acceleration as you land. Okay, so we got to take that into account. Whenever you push off a soft surface, it's almost going to be hard on you concentrically, and it has the potential to alter your mechanics and how you move. So it's not as simple as this is soft, this is hard, that's good, that's bad. You got to weigh what you're looking for, and it should not alter the mechanics and the way you move. Otherwise, you're going to pick a different surface. Okay. Frequency, how often do you train? The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services info, certainly preferably every day, doing something. But that said, for frequency in general, we talk about your goal is endurance, should be pretty much every day. We've talked this a little bit before, something every 24 to 48 hours for endurance type work, basic endurance type work, basic strength endurance. Movement skill is every day, pretty much every day something, right? You're looking at building endurance every 24 to 48 hours. Hypertrophy, you want specific focus on size, looking at 48 to 72 hours. Yeah, not 4 days, not a week, 2 or 3 days before you go back into the thing again, expecting that you won't be able to necessarily do it the same level of intensity too soon. But if it takes you more than 3 days to recover from hypertrophy type training session, then there's something wrong in the way we're training. Okay, or we're not ready for that kind of training, one of the two. And then, of course, maximal strength, maximal power, generally accepted to be 72 to 96 hours between doing it again. Don't do heavy-duty, intense plyos or sprinting or Olympic lifting, the hardcore stuff. It's really significantly intense, high concentric challenge, low eccentric challenge for some of that. That said, every 3 to 4 days, okay? Do any more than that, you're going to almost guaranteed to see injuries or lesser benefit in performance. The exception might be some freak of nature who is beyond the norm. That's always possible. Duration, session versus set. Your total session itself might be 60 minutes or 90 minutes or half hour. Each set has its own time, right? I should say the duration of that set, your duration we've talked briefly about before. We talk about ATP, CP, maximal power, 10 seconds or less. It's a good rule. 5 seconds or less would really be the exact for 100% or near 100% force output. About 10 seconds, maybe a little bit under 100% force output for maximal strength, maximal speed, maximal power. Closing about 30 to 40 seconds-ish. We're still working on some speed, power, strength, okay? But you start going more towards 40 to 75 seconds for time under tension for hypertrophy. We're talking about 75 seconds to about a couple minutes for strength endurance. And for true cardiovascular type endurance, type 1 muscle fibers, we're talking about 2 or 3 minutes and beyond. Just a sec, Betty, girl, I'm almost done, okay? I won't let you fall asleep, okay? I'm just finishing this part, then we can play, okay? Or you can go with me on our trip to the store, okay? Or something like that. We'll figure it out, okay? That said, your total session, if you want to maximize testosterone, should not last more than an hour, not including warming up and cooling down. So testosterone maximization, you want to make sure hour or less training session for maximal strength, maximal speed, maximal power, maximal hypertrophy be done in an hour or less. Come back later today and do something else, but don't expect to do another power, strength, hypertrophy type workout for minimum 2 days, maybe 4 days before you come back and do those kinds of things again, right? And that said, intensity, RPE, rate of perceived exertion, a lot of people underrate this. I'd say most people underrate this. Asking an athlete on a regular basis, how did that feel on a scale of 1 to 10? How difficult was that? It's not hard to figure out someone's at a 10 when they can't even talk to you, or when they fall apart at the very end of a set, they can't even move the load, or they're falling apart form-wise when they're running. That'll give you the indicator that's clearly a 10 RPE. That is not the goal to always be a 10 RPE. Please be understanding of that. More importantly, though, regardless of RPE, you've got to be clear about what the performance is. What's the force output? That's the primary important performance here. What load are you lifting? Let's do that well. How fast are you supposed to be running? Let's do that. How high are you supposed to jump? Okay, let's look for that. Then what is your RPE on top of that? Okay, or if we're not getting the force output we want, is the RPE high and the force output's low? We need longer breaks, we need shorter work periods, maybe less work periods, right? Whenever we see high RPEs and not high force outputs that go along with it, or expected force outputs, there's problems. Same with percent VO2 max, which is more indicative of endurance type work. I mentioned this before. You can refer to 110, 120, 130, 140, 150% VO2 max, which is kind of like sprinting. Sprinting is like 150% VO2 max, okay? To me, it's kind of inconsequential. You should be thinking more about force output as a whole, and the speed in which you're covering a given distance, time-wise, as opposed to percent VO2 max, but you still can refer to it that way. This is more indicative of work that's 10 minutes and beyond, right? Or doing intervals. But if we're doing aerobic intervals, then we start referring to sub 100% VO2 max. It's an aerobic interval for the most part below 75% VO2 max. Okay. High intensity is often referred to as above 75% VO2 max. That's going to depend upon the individual's lactate threshold, isn't it? Whether that's really high intensity or not. Okay. So yes, theoretically, but for someone who is high level, for me right now, 75% is really intense. Okay? There was a period 25, 30 years ago, 75% VO2 max was absolutely low end of moderate intensity. My lactate threshold was about 85% of my VO2 max. So from a standpoint of difficulty, that's not difficult at all back then. Now, really intense. Percent max heart rate, don't seek that as a number you must get to. We're not going to get you to 70% max heart rate today. We're going to stay below 70% max heart rate today. We want your force output to be this. Want to see RPE about this. Hopefully about this VO2 max and this heart rate. Those are good numbers to set as parameters in advance, knowing that ultimately we have to examine the actual performance. But you should always have these ideas in your head. If you do so, you'll be a better coach, athlete, trainer, therapist, you name it, by doing that, okay? Warming up should be 10 to 15 minutes in general, 5 minutes or less for extreme heat and humidity, maybe 20 minutes or longer when it's extremely cold, but that's a good general time frame, moving from a very generalized output toward a more specific output, right? The whole goal of a warm-up is to increase force output and work capacity, not just increase blood flow and temperature. If that was true, you could sit in a hot room or go sit in the sun for a while and you're warmed up and ready to go. That's not true. Or just move randomly and spastically. That's not true. You need more than that. Goal specific, your warm-up should be consistent with the activities and the motions and the movement skills you're going to need in the training session. Hot or cold, we talked about, shorter or longer. Same with our warming up and our cooling down as well. Longer, slower durations of work, typically speaking, may expect longer warming up and longer cooling down. Shorter, more explosive work and efforts, probably shorter cool downs and warm-ups. Okay, we don't want to overly fatigue people when we're trying to look for maximal intensities versus lower and moderate intensities or durations. Stretching itself, static stretching, we refer to stretching. If we're looking at static stretching, probably best before all forms of exercise, including the warm-up, and at the very, very end after everything is done. Some people will say probably better off at the very, very end because your body's warm, you're finishing everything up, just trying to stay loose at the end there, and that's absolutely fair. But there's absolutely nothing to support the idea you can't do static stretching before you exercise. It's untrue that you shouldn't stretch cold muscle. That's not true. The reality is that you won't get the same flexibility, the same elasticity to a muscle when it is cold. Doesn't mean you can't stretch. It just means you need to take it more easy when you do so. I'm a big fan of actually static stretching before someone goes to bed, when they first wake up in the morning, to loosen up, just going to get you going a little bit. Something that's light and easy as opposed to getting too much activity. Doesn't mean you can't go straight for dynamic and skipping the static. That is a choice as well. But if time was not a parameter that defined us for small amounts, I should say, then we're better off doing some static and then moving into dynamic, not just doing one or the other. Okay. And the cool down, kind of returning back to the homeostasis is the goal, and that takes a while. 10 minutes is a normal process, right? So you've got your first post this week due by Friday. It'll be up shortly, and all the posts for this week, including your responses to me and your fellow students, by Sunday. Okay, your paper draft is also due Sunday. So if you haven't emailed me, you don't have to email me your topic, but if you don't do so, you're at risk for the possibility of maybe being too broad with your content, right? So it's up to you. You don't have to email me on that. I will email you and your classmate after you've sent me your paper anytime between now and Sunday. You got to send it to me before midnight on Sunday, preferably sooner than later, please. Your draft, right? I want it to be pretty well written. Beginning draft. This is not your final paper, but something someone can critique and evaluate for APA format, for content, for grammatical errors. The more you give them to be able to break down, the easier your final draft is going to be, right? That's kind of the intent. One, to get a chance to examine other people's papers, to learn from each other, to learn what's necessary, to go over the standards and expectations so you know the format better yourself. Your paper will be better. Their people will be better because of your help. That's the whole intent for us all getting a learning process doing this, and to improve everyone by doing it. Okay, and I'm going to then email you either on Sunday night or early Monday morning, preferably on Sunday if possible. You'll get someone else's paper. You're going to know this in advance, whose it's going to be, okay? And I'm going to email you and their name, both of it on there, and then you have to get it back to me and them, so you'll respond back, reply all, right, with the edited paper with your markings. You're going to have to print it out and actually make some physical markings on it. You can do it in any form of computer formatting if you want, as long as we can all edit it. It needs to be in a PDF when you finish it. Some fashions we can all look at it, something that we all have across PCs and Macs. We can't just have something that only works on Mac or only on PCs. That's why Adobe PDF is probably the best way to go in that respect in this. So I'm going to ask you to put it on, okay? And send it back to us before the end of Tuesday. And then you'll get it back and you can make alterations to it. It's going to be due by the 1st of May. And of course, you'll have your third exam due by that time as well. And of course, you'll have your group or single solo project as well due by that time frame. Email me. If you have questions, let me know. I can help you out. Otherwise, I will look forward to talking to you again very, very soon. Take care till then.